Okay, so for this video, we're going to be looking at point of view. I'm going to try something a bit different here. I'm going to create these notes live as we go through the video. This may be a disaster. It might work. You never know. Let's go on this journey and find out. So anyway, we're looking at this idea of point of view. Now, there are three basic types of point of view. Okay, there's first person, there is second person, and quite obviously there is third person. And hopefully this is not great news to any of you. Hopefully you've heard of this concept before. So first person, second person, and third person. Obviously the difference between that is that if we go over here, create another little blue box, we have first person, even. So for first person, we use words like I did this, I did that, I experienced the story. And that's how we know it's in first person. Second person does not get used very often because it can be incredibly annoying. You did this, you did that, and you experienced story. The reason it can get really annoying is because basically it feels like the author is telling you what to do the whole time that you're reading the story. So you walk into a room and you see this amazing thing and you feel awed by it. And then a monster appears at the window and you feel scared. And then you as the reader are just sort of sitting there going, actually, no, I don't really feel scared right now. Not really feeling it. Stop telling me how to feel, basically. So we don't tend to use second person very often. The notable exception for that is some choose your own adventure stories. That's pretty much the only genre where you can get away with using second person. So basically, short version, let's do this here, make it nice and clear. Second person, this is a giant big no. Haha, we do not use second person, okay? So first person, definitely an option. Second person, probably not. And third person is relatively more common. So it's the character's name. Let's call him John. John did this. John did that. And John experienced the story. John walked into a room and sat down. John leapt up because he realised someone had put a pin tack on his chair, and now John had a sore bum. So first person, option, second person, no, third person, also an option. This is point of view at its most basic and at its most simple. However, we have more options than just this, particularly when it comes to this idea of third person here, because third person actually works on a bit of a scale like this. Now, let's actually not do that in red because we're not doing anything now that we shouldn't be doing. We're just making a line. So let's go with the purple line. We have options when it comes to third person. And if we start over at this end here, we have close. And if we start over at this end here, we have distant. And what this is all about is basically the narrator's relationship to us as the readers. So you can have a third person narrator, and the third person narrator can be sitting anywhere along this spectrum. Third person narrator. So what do we mean when we say we can have a third person close or a third person distant? What does that actually look like to us? Let's just move these up here so we've got a bit more space. So a third person close is an example such as the Harry Potter series. They use a third person close perspective because what happens is, although it's in Harry's, although it's third person, Harry did this, Harry did that, we can only ever actually see the story from Harry's perspective. So only from Harry's perspective. POV is an abbreviation we use quite a lot in writing, and that stands for point of view. So it's only from Harry's point of view, and also we hear his thoughts. So it's essentially like we're a little TV camera fixed on his shoulder. Okay, so TV cam on main character, MC is main character, on MC's shoulder. So we are in third person, we're talking about them, we're not them talking, but we only actually ever see the story from their perspective. If they're not there when the event happened, we don't see it. We can't hear anybody else's thoughts. We can't see anybody else's motivations, except if our main character is guessing about them or observing their actions or things like that. So that's a third person close. So we stick very, very tightly, very closely to our main character. Third person distant, on the other hand, is actually what we call omniscient. Omniscient narrator. And an omniscient narrator, as suggested by this idea, omniscient, is a narrator who knows everything. So they can dip in and out of anybody's heads, they can hear everybody's thoughts, they can see the perspective of everybody in the story, and if they need to, they can see, any events that happened regardless of whether the characters were there or not. Now, omniscient, although it sounds like it might be easier because you don't have to worry about just sticking with one particular character, it's actually really, really hard to do well. Because if you're not careful, it can become really confusing about whose headspace you're in at a given time. So as a general rule, and most popular commercial fiction follows this rule, generally speaking, we encourage people to stay away from omniscient narration. Omniscient narration mostly happens in literary fiction, sometimes in children's books. You have an omniscient narrator where the narrator is almost like a character of their own who's standing back and narrating the story and can get into everybody's heads. It can be done quite well in children's fiction, but for adult fiction and for young adult fiction, we generally tend to stick more to this end of the spectrum than we do at this end of the spectrum here. And another reason for that as well is just that, it's called distant for a reason. When we're writing a story, we want the reader to sympathize with our character. We want them to feel like they're going through the same experience with them. We want them to sympathize and to engage with them, the character's plight. And it's much easier to do that if we use a close perspective than if we use a distant perspective. So, first decision. When deciding on point of view, are we going to use first, second, or third? We know we're not going to use second, likely. So first or third. If we're choosing third person, then we have a whole bunch of options here, anywhere from a close perspective through to a distant perspective. And if you're going to write in a close third person perspective, make sure you just do a check of that every now and then, going, now hang on, is this something that this character would legitimately be thinking? Is this something that they would actually know about? Or have I strayed over into omniscient territory and am I now talking about things that aren't actually in my character's perspective? Something else that you have to make a decision about, regardless of what type of narrator you're using, is this idea of time. Now, if you think of your story as a line here, and these are the events that happen in your story, there are a bunch of different options that you have that essentially relate to what we call tense in English. So up here we have things that haven't happened yet, which we call the future tense. We have things that are happening right now, which we call the present tense. And then we have things that have already happened, which we call down here the past tense. Most of the time when you're writing your story, you are not going to be narrating in future tense. Reading an entire story of, I will walk into a room and I will sit down. I will be surprised by the fact that there will be a thumbtack on my chair and I will leap up and I will shout because I will now have a very sore backside. That's going to be an extremely exhausting narrative to read about. We don't really want to read an entire novel set in future tense, so that's not really an issue. So we're just going to delete that one there. Hopefully delete the whole box. No, never mind. And we're just going to move present up here so that we've got a bit more room. So pretend that this line continues up to the top here and goes off the top, and we've got the future up over there. But for now, we just want a bit more space between the present and the past. So you might have read books before that are narrated in the present tense. There's the sort of stories where you go, things like Harry walks into a room and looks around. He sits down next to Aiden. So that's our present tense. Or you might have seen stories written in just a basic past tense. Walked into the room. I saw there was an empty spot next to Sarah, so I sat down. Okay, and obviously you can do either of those with either person as well. So you can have a first person present as well. I walk into the room and look around. I sit down next to Aiden. Or we can have a third person past. We can have, oh my gosh, Georgia walked into the room. She saw there was an empty spot next to Sarah and sat. Okay, so we can do present in either third or first. We can do past in either third or first. But what we need to make a decision about is where our character actually stands in relation to the events of the story that are going on. So it's quite obvious that if we're in the present tense, okay, the events of the story are sort of happening like right here at the time, and our character is narrating them as we're going along. So it's like, let's do a couple of circles along here and say that here we go. So these are going to be all the events of our plot. Whoa, not going to have a big event like that. I mean, we might have a big event, but we don't really need a big circle for it. So these are the scenes in our story, okay? This is all going to make sense in just a minute. Just bear with me. Like I said, this is all a bit of an experiment doing this live, but anyway, that's okay. All right, so say this is our story. This is the beginning of the story because it's the most furthermost event, okay? And then up here at the present, so this is the most recent event. And we've got what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 events that happen in our story. Now, question, are you going to use present tense or past tense? You can just make an arbitrary decision there. But the next thing that gets a little bit more complicated is then, where are you going to stand in relation to the events that are happening? So even if you're narrating in present tense, does that mean that when this event here is happening, okay, you are here and you're narrating in present tense. And then as the story goes along, you hop with it. Still in present tense, still in present tense, still in present tense, still in present tense, etc., etc. What that means is that each time you're at one of these events, so say you're narrating something from here, you don't actually know how the rest of the story is going to end. So you know how sometimes you get stories that start with, let me tell you a story about the time I did this, this, and this. Well, they're narrating from, this point all the way up here. Let me tell you about all this stuff that happened to me. Let's go back to the beginning and we'll discuss the stuff that happened. You can't do that if you're going to have a tight present tense narration, because your narration is hopping forward as the events are occurring, right? If you have a past tense narration, okay, so we are narrating from somewhere here after the event has already happened, where are you going to draw that cutoff? Are you going to be narrating from here, going all the way back and saying, as I said just before, let me tell you a story about all these things that have happened to me? Are you going to be narrating at gaps between each one? So this is what you might get, for example, if you're doing a series of diary entries. So, I'm standing here and I'm telling you about this event that's just happened, and it's in the past, but it's only just happened. And again, standing here, telling you about this event that just happened in my diary entry. And here, event that just happened, here, event that just happened, so on and so forth. So that's often what you get with diary entries. So you're using the past tense. It means that you've got a little bit of scope for the character to reflect on what happened. It's not like the present tense where they're just caught up exactly in what's happening. You can't really have them reflecting on their situation too much because they're involved in the action. So you can have time for a bit of that reflection. but you also don't know what's happening. So you've got that sense of mystery of what